Number 10. Eternals vs. X-Men. So, the Eternals are basically a celestial created experiment and an offshoot of humanity. They have an eternal struggle against another offshoot, the Deviants. Eternals have hardwired programming to protect the Celestials and to correct excess deviation. Now, a recent revelation about mutants and deviants causes the new Eternal leader, a pretty sinister guy by the name of Druig, to decide that the mutants represent excess deviation. Thanks to that, war is declared on all mutants everywhere. Following their programming, Eternal assassins come to Krakoa to destroy the Five. Massive war machine Eternals called the Hex are unleashed on Krakoa, and Uranos, one of the oldest and nastiest of all the Eternals, is unleashed on Arakko. Now, Uranos is only able to be released from his prison for 1 hour at a time, but within that hour, Uranos is able to take out every member of the Great Ring of Arakko, all of which are Omega level mutants. Hell, in the first 20 minutes, Uranos eradicated Cable, Magneto, and David Haller, otherwise known as Legion. He then goes on to wipe out about 1 million mutants. Number 9. Magneto vs. Red Skull. Now, some of you may know this, but I think this is one of my absolute favorite Magneto moments, and he has a lot of good ones, so that's saying something. Magneto and the Red Skull are on opposite sides of history. Magneto grew up in a Jewish family living in Germany during World War II, and we all know Red Skull and Hydra's stance in World War II Germany, so it's safe to say that these two villains don't really like each other, right? In Acts of Vengeance from 1989, Magneto and Red Skull were actually temporarily united, but it's really important to note here that Magneto was unsure whether this was the Red Skull that aided Germany. So Magneto confronted him, and Red Skull did indeed confirm that he was the original. Now, it didn't take much for Magneto, the master of magnetism, to overpower the Red Skull, but unlike what you might think, Magneto does not take his life. Instead, Magneto leaves the Skull isolated in a stripped down fallout shelter 20 feet underground. He removed the ladder from the escape hatch, gave him 10 gallons of water, took out his homing transmitters, gave him no food, no light, just water, air, and his own depraved thoughts. Number 8. Hulk vs. Abomination. Compared to their counterparts in the MCU, Abomination and the Hulk in the comics are basically like gods. Comic book Abomination is completely psychotic, and the Hulk is basically a god of rage and strength. So, when the Abomination took the life of Betty Ross in the comics using his irradiated blood, he was not getting out of it easily. When they come head to head in the Incredible Hulk Volume 25 from 2000, it's arguably one of the best Incredible Hulk fights I have ever seen. Emil Blonsky comes walking out of the water, and before he even knows what happens, Hulk is on him like shrimps on the Barbie. The ground around them almost instantly becomes rubble. The fight travels underwater and through a dam, flooding an entire town. All the while, these two green Goliaths are in a close combat slog match. Then, Emil decides to taunt the Hulk, which just makes him angrier, increasing his strength, and the Hulk absolutely pummels the Abomination, laying on fist after fist after fist, causing minor earthquakes and leaving Emil on the edge of life with his brain exposed. Other than being just an amazing fight, this comic also really shows the relationship between these two on a level not really captured anywhere else. Number 7. Ma-Nucci. If you want to talk brutal moments in Marvel Comics, you really need to look no further than the Punisher. Now, Ma-Nucci is the head of the Nucci crime family, so yeah, she ain't really a nice lady. Before the moment I'm about to talk about, Frank Castle had thought that he had already neutralized the threat of old Ma here, and that's because he literally fed her to a gaggle of polar bears. Now, while they didn't finish her off, the bears did happen to relieve Ma of her arms and her legs. It was that action that prompted the hiring of the Russian. In the Punisher Volume 5, number 12, after taking down about 80, yes 80 of her thugs, Punisher comes back to finish the job. 80 men were already obliterated, so no one was really willing to lend the legless and armless head of crime a hand as Frank burned down her mansion. She puts up a decent fight with no limbs though, which is kind of impressive. After she attempted to gnaw off his ankles, unsurprisingly unsuccessfully, Frank uses his big old boot plus the muscles in his leg and not so gently flings this helpless, horrible woman into the burning pyre that used to be her home. Number 6. Punisher Netflix prison fight. The Punisher isn't just absolutely ruthless in the comics. When Punisher made his way onto the small screen in Netflix's Daredevil series, he gave us probably one of the most downright savage and ferocious cinematic Marvel moments ever. Taking place in Daredevil Season 2, Episode 9, Frank, played by the irreplaceable Jon Bernthal, found himself in prison alongside the scum that he absolutely despises, and thanks to the Kingpin's influence, he gets locked in a hallway with about 10 inmates, his bare fists, and some very rudimentary prison tools. What follows is a solid 2.5 minutes of absolute savagery and brutality as he swiftly ushers each of these inmates to the afterlife, leaving him bruised and battered and covered in the red vino on tap, and ready to face off against a group of officers in riot gear who come in afterwards. Knowing how the main Marvel Cinematic Universe shies away from anything not suitable for a 12-year-old, this scene, and honestly all of the Netflix Marvel shows, stand out as something truly different and exactly what us older fans expected to see from someone as ruthless as the Punisher. Number 5. Punisher vs. Wolverine. Yes, the Punisher is taking up 3 points on this list, and I think it's pretty justified. In the early 2000s, Punisher faced off with Wolverine in Punisher number 16 and 17. Essentially, the Punisher found himself in the crosshairs of Logan, and he needed to buy himself some time without Wolverine getting in his way. To do this, Punisher blows off Wolverine's face with a bit of buckshot in Punisher number 16. Now, thanks to his insane healing factor, Logan is still standing with his face already starting to heal over his exposed adamantium skull. So obviously, that didn't really buy the Punisher much time. So instead, in Punisher number 17, Frank Castle makes things just a little bit more below the belt, literally, as he wiped Wolverine's gonads off of the playing field in a similar way to how he took off his face. But of course, even this won't stop the mutants, so Frank Castle resorts to even more drastic and kind of creative measures. Needing the means to give himself at least a day or two before Logan will start coming after him again, the Punisher uses a steamroller to slowly but completely flatten Logan, and then he parks it there and walks off to do his business. If anything, I think this is a testament to how powerful Wolverine actually is. Number 4. Alejandra Jones. Alright, buckle up because this one involves Adam. Not me, like the biblical Adam. In Marvel Comics, Adam has devoted himself to one day eradicating sin from mankind at any cost, even human souls. To that end, Adam took in orphaned children and trained them within a Nicaraguan temple to make them perfect hosts for the Ghost Rider. Now, with the Fear Itself event and the arrival of the Serpent, Adam decided that this was a sign to make his move and offered to free Johnny Blaze from the Ghost Rider. Adam awakened the Seeker and had him pick the new Ghost Rider among his students. Alejandra Jones was the one chosen and was immediately sent to battle Scotty, one of the Serpent's avatars. When she came back, Adam demanded that she destroy the sin in the other orphans, leaving them as complete husks. Now, she obviously refused to do that, but in return, Adam made her an unwilling servant. Johnny Blaze, realizing that he made a boo-boo, journeyed to Nicaragua to stop them, but Adam turned Alejandra's power into a massive explosion that encompassed most of the entire country, turning the citizens, all of them, into mindless emotional shells of the individuals that they once were. The only ones unaffected by the blast were Johnny himself and the Seeker. Alejandra was used to destroy the whole of Nicaragua. Number 3. M-Day. So we know that in the House of M story, Scarlet Witch altered reality in some rather big ways. But it wasn't as if everything before this didn't happen, just no one could remember it. One mutant by the name of Layla Miller, for example, could remember the reality before, and she used her powers to restore the memories of a bunch of other heroes. Another mutant who you might know of by the name of Wolverine could sense that something was wrong with this reality. Now, he and a few other heroes, including a resurrected Hawkeye, formed up into a team and put things back to normal. Now, seeing as Magneto was now the ruler, it made sense to them that he was the one responsible, and they went on to attack him. During the scuffle, Magneto had his memories returned to him by Layla, and Wanda convinced him it was Quicksilver who urged her to do the whole reality warping thing in the first place. Angrily confronting Quicksilver, who admitted that he would have let Wanda perish, Magneto made him perish. Wanda, who was thoroughly angry and pretty unstable yet again, revived her brother, yelled at her not father, denounced Xavier, and in 3 words, no more mutants, she reverted reality. She depowered 90% of the entire mutant population, resulting in a huge loss of life. All this on the day forever known as M-Day. Number 2. Ultimatum. Ultimatum was supposed to be how the writers finished off the Ultimate Universe stories. Obviously, it didn't really work out that way. Writers kind of just went a little haywire with the things they would do with a dying universe story. Basically, Magneto, who had been a pretty brutal villain in the Ultimate Universe so far, goes even farther during the mega event. Basically, after Magneto gains control of the Hammer of Thor and is manipulated by none other than Dr. Doom, he messes with the magnetic pillars of the world, flipping them on their head and sending weather into a frenzy. The biggest event was a giant tsunami called the Ultimatum Wave that basically put New York underwater and brought a giant casualty list. Bruce Banner perishes, but the Hulk ends up living somehow, multiple X-Men pass away, the Wasp gets eaten by the Blob, who in turn gets his head bitten off by Hank Pym, Dormammu turns Doctor Strange into a squished ketchup bottle, and Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are sent to the afterlife. In a bit more of a divisive move, while the X-Men are looking for their fallen teammates in the wake of the tidal wave in New York, Magneto pays a visit to Professor X and in a pretty brutal scene, snaps the professor's neck. In retaliation, the X-Men attack Magneto's fortress. Angel gets stomped and chomped by Sabretooth, and Magneto eventually rips the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton and pretty much disintegrates him. And that's just the big stuff. And finally, in at number 1, it's the fall of X. During this year's annual mutant celebration, the Hellfire Gala, literally on the very next page after the new X-Men team is finally announced, out of nowhere, the anti-mutant organization known as Orchis attacks the gala, with Nimrod coming crashing down from the thermosphere at terminal velocity. He completely obliterates Dazzler, Frenzy, Cannonball, and Prodigy, and then punches Jubilee into the ground, wiping out 5 of the 8 new X-Men before he managed to decimate Bobby Drake Iceman, another Omega level mutant. While Juggernaut held off Nimrod, Jean Grey was taken out by Moira X, and Dr. Stasis revealed to Professor X that the medicine that the X-Men had been producing for the world that has led to Krakoa becoming a world power have all been tampered with, and Stasis can now control or wipe out any human who used any of the medicine produced by the X-Men. In exchange for him agreeing to not do that, Charles Xavier agrees to use his power to force the mutant population of Krakoa, some 200,000 strong mutants, to go through teleportation gates to the X-Men's home on Arakko/Mars. Now, Orchis planned on having Arakko being its next target, but instead, something went horribly wrong and 200,000 mutants were suddenly transported to the White Hot Room, essentially the afterlife and the base of operations of the Phoenix Force.
At number 10 is Robin. In one of the most famous Batman stories ever, Jason Todd left Batman to search for his biological mother in the Middle East. He found her, but she ended up betraying him and selling him out to the Joker, who then captured him and whacked him mercilessly with a crowbar. He then left him in a warehouse that was rigged with explosives before ringing up Batman and taunting him with his deed. Batman raced to save Jason, but he arrived too late. The warehouse exploded and Jason passed away in Batman's arms. And although it would later be revealed that Todd was resurrected via a Lazarus pit, Jason Todd would never be the same again, becoming the infamous anti-hero known as the Red Hood. If you're enjoying this video so far, please support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. I really appreciate it. At number 9, Superman gets whooped by Alfred in Injustice Among Us. In this alternate reality, Superman was driven insane by the Joker, who tricked him into his pregnant wife Lois Lane, and also destroying Metropolis with a hydrogen device. Superman went on to eliminate the Joker and then decided to impose his will on the world, creating a regime that enforced peace through fear and violence. Batman obviously opposed him, forming a resistance that included other heroes and villains. Superman and Batman fought many times until Superman broke Batman's back and left him paralyzed. But Batman had one last ace up his sleeve: Alfred. Alfred had taken a pill that gave him superpowers courtesy of Lex Luthor. He then confronted Superman in the Batcave and delivered a brutal beatdown that left Superman stunned and hurting. Alfred was furious at Superman for hurting Batman, whom he loved like a son. He told Superman that he had failed as a hero and as a man. I mean, he's an alien, so can't hurt too bad. He then carried Batman to safety, leaving Superman in shame. Like, imagine getting beat by Alfred? What? And you're Superman! At number 8, the pain of the gods. In this emotional story, each member of the Justice League of America had to deal with a situation where they failed to save someone or something, and how the ramifications of that affected them and their teammates. The story was divided into 6 issues, each focusing on a different hero and their ordeal. In issue 101, Superman tried to save the people from a burning building, but it was too late to save a fellow hero who sacrificed himself to help. He then blamed himself for not being fast enough or strong enough to prevent this hero's demise. In issue 102, the Flash tried to save 2 teenagers from a fire, but he too was too late to save them from smoke inhalation. He became obsessed with preventing fires and installing smoke detectors in every house in his city. In issue 103, Green Lantern tried to stop 2 domestic cases, but he was too late to save a woman who was eliminated by her husband. He then questioned his ability to protect people and his role as a hero. In issue 104, Martian Manhunter tried to understand human emotions and cope with his loneliness as the last survivor of his race. He then encountered a psychic parasite that fed on his pain and memories and almost took him out. In issue 105, Wonder Woman tried to stop a new villain who had eliminated several people with his sonic powers. She nearly bit the bullet herself when the villain shattered her bones with his voice. She then sought comfort and healing from her friends and allies. And finally, in issue 106, the story concluded with a revelation that Batman had been secretly investigating a mysterious unaliving case that involved all previous incidents. He then discovered that his unaliver was actually an ancient god who wanted to punish the ALA for their arrogance and pride. At number 7, Kraven's Last Hunt. In this classic story, Kraven was frustrated by his repeated failures to catch and defeat Spider-Man, who he had considered his greatest prey. He then devised a new plan that involved shooting Spider-Man with a tranquilizer dart that made him appear. He then buried him in a grave and donned a replica of his black costume. He then went on a rampage across New York City, brutally attacking criminals and even saving Mary Jane Watson from a gang of thugs. He wanted to show that he himself was a better Spider-Man than Spider-Man originally was. But Spider-Man turned out not actually to have passed away. He was only in a deep coma, which was induced by the tranquilizer. He woke up 2 weeks later and dug himself out of his grave, seeking revenge on Kraven. At number 6, Invincible vs. Omni-Man. In the final episode of the first season of Invincible, the animated series based on the comic book by Robert Kirkman, we witnessed one of the most brutal and heartbreaking superhero fights ever. Omni-Man reveals his true origin as a Viltrumite, a member of a highly advanced and aggressive alien race that seeks to dominate the galaxy. He tells Mark that he was sent to Earth to prepare it for the Viltrumite takeover, weakening Earth from within, and that he never loved his human wife or son. He then proceeds to brutally attack Mark, who tries to reason with him and stop him from eliminating innocent people. The fight is a one-sided massacre as Omni-Man easily overpowers Mark and inflicts severe damage. He punches him through buildings, mountains, and even a subway train, causing massive destruction and casualties. He mocks Mark's ideals of heroism and compassion and tries to convince him that humans are worthless and disposable. He even says that he could just end Mark and make another son, asking, "What's 17 more years?" As if Mark's life meant nothing to him. The fight ends when Omni-Man realizes that he can't bring himself to eliminate Mark despite his defiance. He breaks down in tears and flies away, leaving Mark in a pool of his own red bodily fluids. Mark survives, but is left traumatized and confused by his father's betrayal and violence. This fight is not only brutal in terms of physicality, but also the emotional torture. Omni-Man not only tries to eliminate his own son, but also attempts to destroy his sense of identity and purpose. At number 5 is the Hulk versus Wolverine. In this alternate reality, Wolverine was hired by Nick Fury to hunt down and eliminate Hulk, who was out in hiding. Wolverine tracked him down and found him meditating peacefully. The Hulk recognized Wolverine as a fellow victim of government experiments and asked him to leave him alone. But Wolverine provoked him by insulting him and stabbing him with his claws. See, he wanted to see how strong the Hulk really was. And he got his answer when the Hulk grabbed him by the legs and tore him in half. He threw his upper body down a mountain and kept his lower half as a snack. Wolverine had to crawl his way back to his legs while the Hulk threatened to eat one of them. It took him hours to reach them, and he barely managed to reattach them before the Hulk came back for more. Luckily for Logan, She-Hulk, who is actually Betty Ross in this universe, intervened and calmed the Hulk down by revealing that she was pregnant with his child. At number 4 is Cyclops in Infinity War. In the comic book event titled Infinity War, Thanos had obtained the Infinity Gauntlet, giving him control to all aspects of existence. He used it to eliminate half of all living beings, including many superheroes and mutants. He then retreated to his home planet Titan, where he was challenged by the remaining heroes who wanted him to undo his mass unaliving. Cyclops was among them and used his optic blast to attack Thanos. But Thanos was too powerful. He easily countered Cyclops' blasts and trapped him in a cube of solid adamantium, the strongest metal in the universe. The cube was airtight and unbreakable, and Cyclops suffocated and perished in agony, while Thanos mocked him and his teammates, easily defeating them. This was a tragic moment for all, but a super devastating defeat and demise for Cyclops. At number 3, Bane breaks Batman. In the comic book history arc Nightfall, Bane was a mastermind who orchestrated a massive prison break that unleashed hundreds of criminals into Gotham City, watching as Batman exhausted himself trying to stop them all. Bane then attacked him in his own home, the Wayne Manor, confronting Bruce in the Batcave and challenging him to a fight. Bane taunted and mocked him, telling Bruce that he knew everything about him and that he was superior in every way. The ensuing fight was brutal and intense as Bane overpowered Batman and whooped him mercilessly. He broke his bones, his gadgets, and his spirit. He then delivered the final blow that would become iconic in comic book history. He lifted Batman over his head and then slammed him down on his knee, breaking his back. He then left him lying on the ground, defeated and nearly permanently paralyzed. Now Batman had faced someone better in everything he prided himself on. He faced someone who had invaded his privacy and security, who had shattered his body and his legacy. This fight was a shocking and dramatic example of how a superhero can face a fate worse than their demise, losing their ability, their dignity, and their mantle. At number 2 is Professor X. Charles Xavier really can't catch a break as he ends up facing a gruesome demise in nearly every universe. But in this particular alternate reality, Magneto unleashed a cataclysmic event called Ultimatum, which caused massive natural disasters and eliminated millions, including many superheroes and mutants. He declared war on humanity and summoned all mutants to his side. Professor X tried to stop him using his telepathy to locate him and confront him in his base. He tried to reason with him, reminding him of their friendship and their common goal, and he also warned him that he would not succeed and that he would only be remembered as a madman and a tyrant. But by this point, Magneto was too far gone. He was enraged by Professor X's words, especially when he was compared to the leader of that fascist regime from World War II, who was responsible for mass unalivings via internment camps, including Magneto's own family. In retaliation, Magneto snapped Professor X's neck with his magnetic power, and Charles perished instantly. Magneto went on to broadcast this demise to the world, hoping to demoralize the remaining heroes and mutants who opposed him. And at number 1 is Final Crisis. In this epic story, Darkseid, the ruler of Apocalypse, a planet of fire and torture, launched his final assault on Earth. He used his agents to spread the anti-life equation, a mathematical proof that life is meaningless and that Darkseid is gone. No, I'm kidding. It's essentially like mind control math. He broadcasted it through all forms of media, infecting millions of people with his mind control. He also corrupted some of the superheroes, turning them into his minions. He then unleashed his forces to wreak havoc and eliminate anyone who resisted. Now, the remaining heroes tried to fight back, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. They faced unimaginable horrors and losses. They saw their friends and allies fall or betray them. They witnessed the demise of Martian Manhunter, one of their founding members, and even saw Batman, the world's greatest detective and strategist, break his own rule against using pew-pews and pew-pew Darkseid with a bullet that could eliminate gods, but even that wasn't enough to stop him. Darkseid's victory was complete. He turned Earth into a twisted version of Apocalypse where he ruled with an iron fist, making everyone worship him and obey his every command. At number 10 is Batman. Yeah, that's right. I'm starting off my list with a hero. Sue me. Batman possesses a unique challenge to Superman, primarily due to his strategic mind and preparedness. See, not only does Batman carry kryptonite on him at all times, keeping him strapped, which is, as we all know, the Man of Steel's ultimate weakness, but he's also a billionaire with the resourcefulness to match his intellect. This combination of absolute wealth and absolute cunning makes Batman a formidable adversary. Their clashes have produced varying outcomes outcomes, showcasing the dynamic nature of their rivalry. Batman's ability to defeat almost any character in the comic book world underscores his prowess. It's often suggested that with enough preparation and time, Batman can take on anyone, even Superman. Their conflict stems from Batman's unease with an alien wielding all this immense power without any accountability, paralleling Lex Luthor's concerns. Superman and Batman, despite both being heroes, share conflicting philosophies on achieving justice. While they both aim for the greater good, their methods sharply differ. In the realm of brutal Superman villains, Batman is a relentless force, not just challenging the Man of Steel's seemingly unstoppable might, but actually overcoming it. At number 9 is Alfred Pennyworth. Alright, I'll promise I'll cover actual villains as soon as I'm done talking about our main man, Alfred. See, Bruce Wayne's unassuming butler holds a hidden brutality so fierce, it makes even Superman quake in his little red boots. In the Injustice comic series, Superman is consumed by a ruthless quest for control after the Joker takes out his wife and makes him go crazy. Superman would then infiltrate the Batcave with the intent to incapacitate Batman. With the Dark Knight left vulnerable and on the brink of defeat, Alfred steps into the ring. Armed with a strength-enhancing super pill supplied to him by Lex Luthor himself, he wages a relentless assault and one-way beating against the Man of Steel. In a shocking turn of events, Alfred headbutts Superman, breaking the hero's nose, and then proceeds to pummel him mercilessly, driving that goody two-shoes face into the unforgiving floor. This surprising triumph stands as a testament to Alfred's unwavering dedication to protecting his surrogate family, showcasing that even the mightiest of superheroes can suffer humiliatingly brutal defeats at the hand of seemingly weaker opponents. If you're enjoying this video so far, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. I would really appreciate if you did do those things because it supports the channel, it's free, and makes me happy. At number 8 is the Mongol. The Mongol is a formidable intergalactic conqueror who stands as a relentless adversary in Superman's rogues gallery. Hailing from the distant stars, he commands Warworld, a mobile war machine planet that traverses the cosmos seeking conflict. Mongol is honed through training with the Sinestro Corps and possesses unparalleled combat skills and tactical acumen. While overshadowed by the likes of Darkseid, let's say, Mongol and his warlord family persistently vex Superman. At number 7 is Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor is the most obvious contender on this list, and for good reason. Lex is widely known as Superman's arch nemesis, despite the fact that the only thing he's got going for him is his vast intellect. Now, despite his apparent lack of superpowers, Lex has been able to outsmart Superman a countless number of times. He's even directly responsible for the creation of many of Superman's other villains, some of whom will get their own spot later on this list. Stick around for those. Most of his successful evil plans involve the use of a machine he's invented, like whenever he drains Superman's powers into himself, or that time he convinced Superman to join the Legion of Supervillains after erasing his memory using a device he called the Amnesia-inator. I mean, the memory expunger. Not as cool. But inventing machines isn't all he's good for. As it turns out, this slimy dude's also good at inventing political narratives too. He has gone on political endeavors many times over his villainous career, and not only has he successfully used his position in office to create laws and policies that benefited him personally, just like every other politician, but he's also convinced the citizens of Metropolis of Superman's threat to their safety on more than one occasion. These very few examples alone make it easy to understand where Lex Luthor's notoriety comes from. At number 6 is Mr. Mxyzptlk, whose name is so fun to pronounce that I'm just gonna call him Mr. M for the rest of the video. Mr. M is a mischievous fifth-dimensional imp, which, for all of you who don't speak nerd, essentially means that he's a godlike magical trickster. Although in most stories he's pretty harmless, this cosmic equivalent of an internet troll can stir up more commotion than even Superman can handle. Unlike a certain pink ditto wannabe that we know, Mr. M's potential for destruction is far more limitless than any of the characters on this list can even manage, because Mr. M is so powerful that practically anything goes. Back in '89, he humiliated Superman by crafting a fantasy world in which he was the ruler and Superman was his obedient servant. In '91, he aged Superman rapidly until he became an old man too weak to defend Metropolis from Mr. M's ensuing wrath. In '95, he even created an even more powerful version of himself, and Superman was left with no other recourse but to beg Mr. M to help put an end to his more powerful self. His power is truly limitless. It's like having the power of a genie, the mischief of a leprechaun, and the hairstyle of Weird Al Yankovic all rolled into one. At number 5 is Darkseid. There are some villains that Superman is simply no match for. So when the tyrannical ruler of the aptly named planet Apocalypse is wreaking havoc, it takes the combined efforts of each member of the Justice League to take him down. His most iconic means of world domination sees him utilizing the anti-life equation to impose his will on any and all sentient beings. But when he's not using magic math, Darkseid tyrannizes his opponents by other various means of manipulation, including emotional, technological, and psychological manipulation, which has allowed him to, for example, take an advantage of the Time Trapper's powers in an attempt to pull a Biff from Back to the Future 2, or the various times he's compelled Superman into unwittingly doing his bidding. But if he's really all that genius, maybe he should be trying to discover the anti-losing equation instead. At number 4 is Parasite. Personally, I find this villain's appearance to be brutally revolting, earning this anthropomorphic tumor our number 4 spot. Jokes aside, the Parasite of the DC Universe is a major force to be reckoned with, as his primary superpower is the ability to steal superpowers from others. Admittedly, however, as versatile as this power sounds, it leads to pretty predictable outcomes. Parasite comes along, feeds off Superman, who then, in a weakened state, has to figure out how to either get his powers back or defeat the Parasite in some other way. Thankfully, we finally got to see this formula get altered in Superman Batman number 23 to 25 back in 2005, with the introduction of an army of superpowered minion parasites, which is pretty fun. Ultimately, as predictable as the encounters against Parasite may be, his powers are so OP that he nonetheless deserves a spot here on this list. At number 3 is Brainiac. Sometimes an android, sometimes a cyborg, but always an alien, Brainiac is yet another evil genius that joins us today on our list. Brainiac relies on his advanced tech to cause disruption. In one issue from '83, he merged with Lex Luthor's body and used their combined intellect to create a more powerful body for himself. And in a story from 2002, whose plot sounds like it should have been released in 1999, Brainiac infects Metropolis with the computer virus, causing mass chaos and destruction. But the evil plans Brainiac is probably most well known for have to do with this hobby of shrinking and collecting entire cities and planets. He's miniaturized Kandor and Metropolis on multiple occasions, and even the Man of Steel himself, with the goal as lofty as the recreation, or sometimes destruction, of the entire universe. You can bet that Brainiac is an unstoppable force to be reckoned with. At number 2 is Doomsday. This villain is famously responsible for the very demise of Superman, and also his various doppelgangers, easily making him one of the most powerful people on this list. He's known for his incredible strength and invulnerability, but not so much for his sophisticated evil plans. They usually just amount to wipe out as many people and Kryptonians as possible. Although in the Superman Doomed storyline from 2014, Doomsday manages to infect Superman with a virus that slowly turns him into a Doomsday-like creature, gradually becoming more unstable and violent, and also aesthetically pleasing, if I do say so myself. And at number 1 is General Zod. This classic Kryptonian had been exiled into the Phantom Zone by the leaders of Krypton prior to the planet's destruction, and Zod, along with his super goons, managed to escape and attempted to conquer Earth. And although Superman managed to put an end to Zod's plans back then, Zod has persisted long enough to see a few victories of his own. Zod's been able to actualize his dreams of conquest not just on Earth, but also on planet Daxam, New Krypton, and even the original Krypton in alternate timelines. While Zod's plans may have seen successes, let's not forget that at the end of the day, he spends most of his time in the Phantom Zone, aka Cosmic Timeout.
Number 10, Civil War II. Captain Marvel and Iron Man used to be super close, but then Civil War II happened and BAM! We are well past the events of Civil War II now, especially regarding relationships being mended, but boy, did this initially muck up the friendship between Carol Danvers and Tony Stark. Although more recently, Tony actually just tallied votes from Legacy Avengers members and actually elected Carol the new leader of the team. Healing! After the success of Civil War I, Marvel thought a second Civil War was in order, but this time the motives behind it weren't quite as solid as the first time around. Carol Danvers believed the Inhuman Ulysses' visions of potential futures should be acted on to protect humanity. In other words, Civil War II was basically Minority Report. Being down this road before, Iron Man tried to talk Carol out of this madness, but after Rhodey died when a prediction of Ulysses' actually came true, there was no stopping her. Ultimately, the event led to a one-on-one fight between Carol and Tony, with Tony being seemingly permanently defeated. Although this is Iron Man, of course, so of course he would recover. We can't have Marvel without Iron Man, so he has to come back. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us you love us by clicking that like. Number 9. Hulk blames Tony Stark for his creation. This fight comes to us from Original Sin. Original Sin was an event where dark truths from many different characters' pasts were unearthed. In Bruce Banner's case, this involved him learning that Tony Stark was the one who basically caused the accident that turned him into the Hulk. Once he knows, Hulk becomes driven to end Iron Man, and while Tony tries to escape and defeat the Hulk, he ultimately fails. In the end, Hulk comes out on top, but despite Tony being badly beaten along the way, the two old friends were able to resolve their past conflict, with Hulk's Bruce Banner realizing that what Tony did years ago, nerfing his gamma explosive, wasn't really that bad in reality. I mean, if not for Stark doing that, Banner probably wouldn't have even survived the explosion and wouldn't even have been alive today. That being said, if he had perished, he also wouldn't be the Hulk, which he kinda is like, I don't even know, should I even be here? But while he regrets his transformation, Tony berates him, saying that the world does need the Hulk and that his being around is not inherently bad. That Banner and Hulk are needed and wanted in the world. Honestly, while the fights are epic, the resolution is also quite epically touching here, I gotta say. I love the end of that, when they just sit down and they're just having their little talk. Talk it out, guys. Sometimes you gotta Hulk smash it out, sometimes you gotta Hulk talk it out. Number 8. Carnage cracks Iron Man. I feel like one of the worst things you can do in a fight with Carnage is bring a symbiote into the fight with you. Bad idea. And yet this is exactly what Tony Stark decided to do in Extreme Carnage Alpha and Omega. He decided to get involved in all things symbiote when Null attacked Earth, infecting one of the symbiote dragons with Extremis to create the Extremebiote. But bringing this new organic suit into a fight with Carnage was kind of a bad idea, as Carnage took over the Extremebiote, leaving Tony completely vulnerable, as he was of course naked underneath. Well, he was beaten here by Carnage and ended up in the hospital to recover. Fortunately, Agent Anti-Venom was around to ultimately save him from Carnage's wrath and help avoid any worse damage to Stark. So, thank goodness, but he still got his butt whooped. Number 7. Pepper reins in an evil Tony Stark. The amount of times heroes have actually had to take on Iron Man is staggering. I mean, you'd think, considering how massive of a hero he is, especially now with his story becoming a worldwide sensation thanks to the MCU, that Iron Man would typically have some of his worst battles against villains, not heroes. But yeah, Iron Man has done some bad stuff in the past, which has meant that even his closest friends and allies such as Pepper Potts have had to turn against him. In this instance, Tony had his alignment reversed during the events of Axis, but rather than allow them to be flipped back, he instead remained a villain even after the event had ended. Tony saw himself as a superior version with no morals to hold him back, becoming known as Superior Iron Man. As such, Pepper was ultimately forced to take him down with the help of an earlier version of Tony, who he dubbed Inferior Iron Man. Number 6. Nothing can tame Bruce Banner. Starting off Hulk issue number 1 with a bang, Donny Cates had Hulk face off against Iron Man in his Hulkbuster armor. Not just one Hulkbuster though, a whole entourage of them. Hulk here being piloted like a spaceship by Bruce Banner, who is in control of Hulk on the inside, even manages to learn that Tony isn't actually inside these suits, but is hiding elsewhere, remote piloting them. He literally learns this by ripping them apart, and then Tony is like, how did you know I wasn't in that suit? And he's like, I didn't know that. I'm crazy. Hulk then finds the real armored Tony and starts wailing on him. Even when Stark attempts to appeal to Bruce's better nature, trying to talk him down, Hulk does not relent. relent. Number 5. Thor's apocalyptic clone. Thor and Iron Man don't always get along, despite them both being colleagues and friends who are both Avengers. Following the first superhero civil war in the comics, the two ended up having some pretty big beef, thanks to Tony making some questionable decisions during that era. Chiefly, it was revealed that Stark had acquired a genetic sample of his friend Thor. I'm just imagining Tony like at the Avengers mansion or something, raiding through Thor's like hairbrush late one night for those sweet genetic samples. He's like, ha ha ha, I have his hair, I can use this at some point. And he decided to keep these genetic samples for a rainy day, in case he ever needed to make, let's say, a Thor clone. After Thor died, that's what he did, creating Ragnarok, Thor's bald and villainous clone who would end up being recruited to Norman Osborn's Stark Avengers. Needless to say, Thor was not too happy to hear of this upon his return to the realm of the living, and ended up revealing just how displeased he was in a one-on-one fight against Iron Man, which went as well for Tony as you would probably imagine. After all, Thor is a god. Thor wouldn't kill Tony, but he definitely made sure to make it known that if he wanted to end Iron Man's life, he could with ease. Number 4. Black Panther gets creative. Who is smarter, Tony Stark or T'Challa? Most people would pick Tony for this kind of versus, but Christopher Priest's Black Panther would say otherwise. In issue number 45 of the 1998 Black Panther series, Iron Man in a stealth suit faces off against Black Panther. This stealth suit was specifically designed for such a task, with Tony attempting to anticipate both Black Panther's offensive and defensive abilities. But what he can't seem to prepare for is just how brilliant T'Challa is, with him demonstrating how resourceful, creative, and brilliant he is in his brutal takedown of Iron Man's stealth armor. Sneaking up on T'Challa, it turns out, is kinda always a bad idea. Number 3. Thanos wins. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, technically one of the greatest defeats of all happened to Iron Man 2. This was when Thanos initially won against all the heroes of Earth and succeeded in collecting all the Infinity Stones and using them to snap half of the population out of existence. It was a wild time for us, and I'm sure the heroes alike. Iron Man learned that the heroes had lost back when he was left stranded on another world, the home world of the Mad Titan Thanos, known as Titan. Not sure if he'd even make his way home ever again. He also ended up being one of the few people left alive after the battle had been fought and Thanos snapped. Iron Man was there to see his protege Spider-Man turn to dust before his eyes as one of the casualties of the events of Infinity War. Number 2. Black Widow does the unimaginable. Black Widow majorly betrayed Iron Man in the Ultimate Universe. While she didn't defeat him at the end of the day, her turning on him came with a pretty great cost, so I'd still say it was a defeat in a way. And while Iron Man did ultimately win in the end, he himself was still standing, I would argue that initially Iron Man was seemingly defeated in ways by Black Widow, who caught him off guard. Also, sure, it's not main continuity, but it's honestly so bad it needs to be acknowledged and mentioned here. In the Ultimate Universe, Black Widow was only posing as a hero, but was really in secret a villain the whole time, simply pretending to defect to get in with the heroes and then betray them and the United States. She was engaged to be married to Tony Stark and ended up breaking off the engagement when she revealed her true colors. She attempted to steal Tony's fortune and tragically killed his loyal butler and friend Jarvis as well. Number 1. Thanos' henchwoman wins. Not only has Thanos won against Tony Stark before, but in the comics, Thanos didn't even fight directly against Tony during the Infinity Gauntlet saga. He apparently had less respect for Iron Man than he expressed in the MCU. Instead of fighting Iron Man one-on-one, Thanos decided to deploy Taraxia. Taraxia was basically created by Thanos in his image to act as his partner after death rejected him. As such, Taraxia basically looks like Thanos, but with a feminine shape and a head full of long blue hair. She was tasked with taking on the heroes at Thanos' behest, and did so with great pleasure. When facing Iron Man in Infinity Gauntlet issue number 4, she brutally defeats him by removing his head from his body. Number 10. Tormented and defeated on repeat. When Joker received 99.9% of Mr. Mxyzptlk's power, he used this power to wreak all kinds of havoc. One of the things he used these new epic reality warping powers for was to torment Batman forever on repeat. Daily, Emperor Joker would severely torment and kill Batman, although in the end, Batman was the key to Joker's defeat, being Joker's one true weakness, since his identity was so closely tied to Batman's. However, Batman was left so traumatized from this whole experience that he became a broken man, a shadow of his former self, unable to operate as a hero. Superman actually had to steal his memories of the experience away in order to return Batman to himself once more so he could resume Doom being a hero and just not being like a complete mess all the time. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us by clicking that like button. Number 9, A League of One. Superheroes don't always lose to supervillains in the comics. In the case of the JLA story A League of One, this time around the League is actually defeated by one of their own, Wonder Woman. However, Wonder Woman doesn't do this to actually cause them harm or, kill them, but simply to get them just out of the way. This is because the League is facing a dragon and there is actually a prophecy that it will cost the group of heroes their lives. Wonder Woman not only manages to defeat the League, but also manages to sidestep her own doomed fate upon facing that dragon. Number 8, Loss of his parents. Obviously, one of the worst defeats to happen to Batman happened to him when he was simply known as young Bruce Wayne. This would be the loss of his parents. Without them dying, he wouldn't be the man he is today, for better or for worse. The death of his parents tormented young Bruce so much that it, along with another freak encounter with a bat, inspired him to become the masked vigilante known as Batman. So in a way, it's this trauma that has led to so many of the other awful experiences that Batman has suffered through, countless physical injuries as well as mental and emotional turmoil, and both victories but also other defeats as well. Number 7, Tower of Babel. In the Tower of Babel event, Ra's al Ghul manages to use Batman's own intel and files on the Justice League to defeat them. Ra's gains access to Batman's systems and is able to retrieve these detailed files and plans via his daughter Talia. He uses this information to take on and defeat all members of the Justice League, even managing to seemingly distract Batman by robbing the graves of his parents. Number 6, Death of the Justice League. The Death of the Justice League kicked off in issue number 75 of the 2018 Justice League series. What happened to the Justice League here? Well, they faced off against Pariah, who himself is from one of the first worlds to be targeted during the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Pariah was cursed with basically watching all these worlds die again and again, unable to stop it, despite being one of the first people to warn everyone that Crisis on Infinite Earths was coming. Now, with the multiverse reset following the events of Death Metal, Pariah claimed that he saw the signs of Crisis on Infinite Earths happening again. Desperate to prevent this, his plan was to wipe the slate clean when it comes to the heroes so that the possibly new Anti-Monitor, who will come into existence, will have no reason to continue with the crisis. That was his thinking anyways. Seems like some flawed logic to me, but this man has also seen some terrible things in his time, so I understand his desperation to do whatever he thinks will work when it comes to avoiding another crisis. Along with most of the rest of the League, Batman was believed to have perished in the fight against Pariah. Of course, we later learned this wasn't exactly what had really happened. Not quite what we thought, as usually when people perish in comics. We're like, they're gone? No, they're back. Number 5, failed Barbara Gordon. One of the hardest failings for Batman was when Barbara Gordon and her father, Commissioner Gordon, were successfully targeted by the Joker. Caught unaware, Babs found herself shot through the spine and paralyzed as a result of this attack. She was attacked and tormented by the Joker, who took pictures of her in pain and in states of undress for the purpose of making her father go insane. This all happened in Killing Joke, and though not all of the events of that story were made canon, Babs' pain and becoming paralyzed were. Batman has always felt awful for what happened to Barbara and has never blamed her, and if anything, he feels more guilty for the fact that he wasn't there and wasn't able to protect her more. Number 4, defeated by the Joker. Jason Todd was lost to Batman years ago when he was defeated by the Joker. Really, both Jason Todd and Batman were defeated by him, as the loss of Jason would haunt Batman for years afterwards. Jason Todd was one of those characters you expected to stay dead too. For years, his death was considered one of the few permanent and unyielding ones in comics, kind of like Uncle Ben, who has always pretty much stayed dead. We never expected to see him return, and yet more than 20 years later, he did just that. The return of Jason would be another rough moment in Batman's life, as when Jason returned, he was drastically and forever changed. Losing Jason had already been one of the hardest moments of Batman's life after all. His coming back, unfortunately, didn't make the loss Batman had suffered years earlier with his defeat to the Joker any less painful, unfortunately. Number 3, Final Crisis, which actually apparently wasn't so final, as Dark Crisis did end up following after its events. But regardless of whether or not it was actually final, Final Crisis was definitely a bad time for Earth. In this story, Darkseid actually succeeds in obtaining and releasing the anti-life equation on Earth. He puts it on the internet where it can be easily seen and then spread. Those who see it basically lose their will to live, becoming enslaved to Darkseid and his will instead of having their own will. While in the end, the heroes heroes do manage to break free from the influence of Darkseid and the anti-life equation, with Batman himself defeating Darkseid in the end with a radion bullet, Darkseid still works to enslave all of Earth and many of its heroes, for a time being seen as the victor. And even when Batman does succeed in beating Darkseid, he himself is believed killed as a result. However, in reality, he was kind of just like thrown way back through time and went to essentially have time-traveling adventures until he finally made his way back to the main continuity universe. But hey, we didn't know that at the time. We had to wait to find that out. Number 2, death of Damian Wayne. Batman has lost a lot of Robins over the years and a lot of adopted sons, but Damian Wayne was his natural heir. Well, natural-ish. As natural as it gets till we get a Helena Wayne in the main continuity, if that ever happens again. A girl can dream, at least. Damian was the son of Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul. He was raised by Talia in the League of Assassins, without Batman even knowing of his existence, until years later when Talia dropped him off on Bruce's doorstep, declaring Damian his son. Initially, the two did not get along very well. Damian was stubborn in his ways and insisted on killing, as he'd been trained his whole life to do, because League of Assassins, but eventually he came around and began to see the value in his father's approach to fighting crime, respecting it and even admiring it. Just as their relationship began to evolve into something more resembling a true father-son connection, built on respect and trust and all that good stuff, Damian was killed by the Heretic, a death that Batman can't even bring himself to avenge when he realizes that the Heretic is Damian's clone. Following Damian's death, we also got Volume 2 of Batman's issue number 18, an issue that focuses on the mourning of Damian's passing and is completely wordless throughout its sorrow-filled pages. Of course, Damian Wayne would also return, but you know, at the time it was brutal. Number 1, death of Alfred. What could possibly be a greater defeat than the loss of Batman's parents, Batman's son? How about the loss of his confidant, his butler, and more importantly, his lifelong father figure, Alfred? I don't think it gets much more brutal than this. While the death of Batman's parents is tragic, Alfred was there to help pick up the pieces and in essence help to raise the boy before his parents passed, and of course thereafter. He was probably one of the closest people to Batman and was more apparent to Bruce in the end than his parents were able to be due to them being lost to him when he was so young. Alfred was shockingly killed by Bane after he kidnapped him when Damian Wayne didn't take Bane's threat seriously and set out to save Alfred. Bad idea, Damian. It was because of his pursuit of Bane that Alfred was killed by the villain, and this was all part of Bane's plan to break Batman again, but this time focusing more on breaking him mentally and psychologically than, you know, physically.
Number 10, Spider-Man Reign. Spider-Man is arguably the face of Marvel, and for some good reasons too. He's incredibly inspiring, full of hope, and is never one to give up. For all those reasons, when Spider-Man Reign was released in 2007, it was incredibly hard to see an old, tired, and torn down Peter Parker who had pretty much given up. Set 30 years after the modern Spider-Man stories with a retired old man version of Peter Parker, Spider-Man Reign's Venom has donned the identity of Edward Sachs, the aide to the current New York mayor, and has been quietly pulling the strings from within. He's recreated himself multiple times, became the new leader of the Sinister Six, and has installed a security system around New York to stop anyone from leaving. He has goons that walk the streets, he's a total criminal mastermind. But of all the dark and depressing things in this story, there is one thing that stands above the rest. Through the course of the story, we learn that Mary Jane, Peter Parker's greatest love, has passed away, and he's been hanging on to this memory of her, and that's likely due to the fact that he is directly responsible. Mary Jane didn't pass away because of a villain or Peter failing to save her. Instead, because of the radioactive spider that gave him his abilities, Peter himself was radioactive. Through the years and years that Peter Parker and Mary Jane had been together and doing what you do when you're together, Peter's radioactive body had essentially given Mary Jane cancer. We learn this as Peter is hugging her decaying body and bawling his eyes out. It's utterly gut-wrenching. Number 9, Marvel Ruins. Marvel Ruins is a story taking place in an alternate comic book universe where literally everything that could possibly go wrong does go wrong. Similar to Ultimatum for part 1, it's best to just list some of the events off, then get specific here. The Fantastic Four's spacecraft crashes into the Earth, and Ben Grimm is left with survivor's guilt. The Incredible Hulk is not so incredible, as the gamma radiation he experienced leaves him as a hulking mass of tumors and deformity. Thanks to the radioactive spider, Spider-Man did not gain the abilities of a spider, he instead developed an incredibly brutal mutant virus that left him with a terrible skin rash, and had him captured and quarantined by the government. The Scarlet Witch betrayed the Avengers to the government, leading to the Quinjet being blown up with all of them inside, and they all go to the grave. Nick Fury was introduced to the idea of eating other people by Captain America. Silver Surfer suffocates in space. Johnny Blaze just sets himself on fire as a stunt and goes out in the same stunt, and Magneto's powers go out of control in an airport, destroying everything. The whole story just leaves you wondering what you're supposed to do with your life right now, and I honestly don't know. I can't help you. Number 8, World War Hulk. Near the end of the Planet Hulk storyline, the shuttle the Hulk was sent to Sakaar in by the Illuminati at the beginning of the Planet Hulk storyline blows up, wiping out the Green Scar's family. Hulk reaches a whole new level of anger, which is directed at those who sent him here, the Illuminati. And so, he headed to Earth with his war sworn. He made a quick stop at the moon to defeat Black Bolt of the Inhumans, and when he got to Earth, he headed to New York City, giving the city a time limit to be evacuated, and when that time limit stopped, well, he defeated everyone who was left. Iron Man and the Hulkbuster, the Avengers plus their tower, the US Army, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, Juggernaut, Doctor Strange using the power of Zom, who is one of the most powerful magical monsters in Marvel Comics, and the Ghost Rider, all while saving innocent bystanders at the same time. He then threw the Illuminati members he captured into the ring against each other, sparing them as he only sought justice. He was eventually sort of defeated by the Sentry, who he fought until they both reverted back to their human forms, which is when Bruce Banner knocked Bob Reynolds out. Number 7, Secret Empire. In Marvel Comics, there is a character known as Cubic, who is essentially a living cosmic cube in the form of a child. With the incredible powers of a cosmic cube, she can pretty much make anything happen. But when she was manipulated by the villainous organization known as Hydra, she created a Captain America who grew up being loyal to Hydra. Now this Hydra Cap would eventually supplant the real Captain America of 616 and would organize the second superhuman civil war, as well as Chitauri invasions of the Earth. He got promoted to Director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and influenced the legislation of the S.H.I.E.L.D. Act, which gave S.H.I.E.L.D. way more authority. He used this new power to basically organize a Hydra takeover of America. Steve Rogers revealed himself as not only a Hydra defector, but the Hydra Supreme. He allied himself with the new Madame Hydra, took advantage of a global catastrophe to seize control of the world's governments, and helped Hydra make its move. Hydra, who had seriously infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D., began assuming control of key locations and taking out anyone who stood in its way, including Cap personally taking out Rick Jones, which is a shot that left fans and characters alike reeling and shocked. The reveal of Captain America as a longtime Hydra agent completely took readers by surprise, and even a bit of anger. His vast history of being the one to do the right thing suddenly meant very little. Number 6, Time Runs Out / The Incursions. So during Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers run, these things called incursions started to happen, orchestrated by the Beyonders. Essentially, two multiverses would crash together, destroying them both, and the focal point for that crash was obviously the Earth. When the incursions started to threaten the multiverse, Namor the Submariner had a different view from the rest of the Illuminati, and during the incursions with Earth 4290001, Namor destroyed that Earth to save both universes and save his Earth. When the next incursion presented itself right after that, the Illuminati were going to just let it happen instead of destroying an entire alternate Earth. Standing against that though, Namor teamed up with Maximus the Mad of the Inhumans, and then together they freed the prisoners of the Illuminati, which included Proxima Midnight, Corvus Glaive, Terrax, the Herald of Galactus from Earth 13054, Black Swan, and the Mad Titan, Thanos himself. Basically, this is like the Black Order plus some insanely powerful additions, and they are very, very powerful. This group of villainous powerhouses were sanctioned by the United Nations to destroy the alternate Earths that appeared during incursions. Now, while Namor had planned to use an explosion to destroy the other Earth, Thanos, who pretty much took control of the group, led them in what was basically a complete and utter slaughter. And ultimately, that was for nothing because the incursions happened anyways, pretty much ending this version of the multiverse and bringing us the newest Secret Wars. Number 5, Sentry ripping Ares in half. The Sentry is a character that deserves some more spotlight. The problem is, he's kind of the most powerful superhero Marvel has. Obviously, that's debatable, but this guy has the power to destroy pretty much anybody in the Marvel Universe. He's reassembled his own molecules and taken out the Molecule Man, for example. He's almost too powerful to include in a lot of stories, but it's the fight between the Sentry and Ares, the literal god of war, in issue 2 of Marvel's Siege event that really left me sitting there going, did that actually happen? And it did. Ares in this story started on the Dark Avengers before redeeming himself and joining the good guys. He had been showing how awesome he is, and he turns his sights on Norman Osborn, which unfortunately means Ares now has to face his friend, the Sentry. Now Sentry punches Ares halfway across Asgard, and maybe 2 or 3 punches later, he grabs both ends of the God of War and rips him completely in half. Not only did it leave everyone on the page frozen, it also left readers completely stunned. Number 4, The Last Avengers Story. In 1995, Marvel released The Last Avengers Story, and with a title like that, being from 1995, you can imagine it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and it's not. Within the first few pages, the current Avengers of this alternate future and their base are completely wiped out by an absolutely massive explosion caused by Ultron 59. Now, Ultron 59 basically then challenges the original Avengers to a final fight against himself and a team of very powerful villains. Now, side note, the art in this comic is actually pretty cool, which unfortunately makes it even worse watching one of the most savage moments from this story. At some time in the past, this version of the Incredible Hulk turned evil thanks to an event that happened fighting alongside Thor, the Thing, and Hercules. The Hulk turned against his fellow Avengers, Wonder Man, Hawkeye, Mockingbird, and Tigra, who absolutely got it the worst. Tigra against the Hulk is not a fight you would normally expect, and this comic tells you why. As in her attack against the Green Goliath, Hulk simply grabs her and pulls her apart, just like Sentry did with Ares. Hawkeye and Mockingbird literally flee for their lives, while Wonder Man flew into a rage, and he and the Hulk had a slog match that ended up with Wonder Man detonating himself and wiping both himself and the Hulk from existence. Number 3, Disassembled. For me, a big thing that shows just how powerful the Scarlet Witch actually is would have to be the Avengers Disassembled event. Wanda and the Wasp were just chilling by the pool when Wasp mentioned Wanda's kids. And the only problem is that the existence of her children had been wiped from her mind. And when Wasp brought it up, it brought all those memories back, and Wanda absolutely lost it. Several things happened next, with none of the Avengers even knowing the cause. For starters, Scott Lang Ant-Man lost his life when a previously deceased Jack of Hearts showed up out of nowhere and just detonated. While the heroes were trying to figure out what just happened, Vision also showed up saying that he was not in control of himself and that he is sorry, as he also begins to detonate. And then Jennifer Walters' She-Hulk began to get uncharacteristically raged and tore Vision in half. Next, we see Tony at the UN conference randomly start to act as though he was incredibly intoxicated, even though he hadn't had a single drink, and he verbally accosted the Latvian ambassador and threatened him. Then, a whole invasion by the Kree just randomly came out of nowhere, resulting in the passing of Hawkeye, and then the Kree just randomly left as quickly as they showed up. All of that was actually Wanda Maximoff using her reality warping magic. It almost led to the superhero community deciding to put Wanda into the afterlife, and actually led to her creating the House of M reality. Number 2, Punisher Max. Punisher Max was an adult comic, and for a guy whose main thing is ushering people to the pearly gates, it kind of makes sense that this setting suits his character best. Removing the Punisher from all the costumes and the superpowers of the regular Marvel universe, and dropping him right into an America facing the early days of the War on Terror, it kicked off with the CIA trying to recruit Frank, which sets off a violent political game. This Frank Castle was a veteran of the Cold War, running Black Ops alongside Nick Fury in Vietnam, and he is not someone you want to mess around with. Like, he lights out Microchip during the very first storyline just for helping the CIA to even find him in the first place. His enemies here are also much more threatening and kind of scarily realistic compared to anything that Earth-616 has thrown at the Punisher, with a big shout out to Barracuda, another former soldier just as ruthless and skilled as Frank is. Punisher Max shows the very real physical and emotional damage that Frank Castle's crusade would really cause him in real life, obviously with like a tiny suspension of disbelief that comes with a comic book. If you choose to give it a read though, just be warned that it is extremely graphic. And finally, in at number 1, it's Kraven's Last Hunt. Kraven the Hunter's comic book tale seemingly came to an end in one of the most shocking Spider-Man stories ever. Kraven's last hunt finally sees the hunter get the drop on Spider-Man. Sticking Spidey in the neck with a dart and then burying Spider-Man 6 feet under, Kraven actually beat his adversary, which only a handful of villains can actually claim to have accomplished. Thinking Peter Parker is down and out, Kraven weirdly starts to take on Spider-Man's costume, or at least a copy of the black Spider-Man costume, and he hunts down criminals. In an attempt to prove to himself that he's better than Spider-Man, he defeated Vermin, a villain Spider-Man couldn't defeat without help from Captain America. Unfortunately though, the whole thing still ends in tragedy for Kraven. Spider-Man digs himself out of his grave and renders Kraven's victory moot, but Kraven also had accomplished his main goal by besting Spider-Man. So convincing himself that he has no reason to now live anymore, Kraven chooses to defeat himself permanently. Number 10, Arachnite. I didn't know that this was something I wanted until it was given to us. The hero known as Arachnite is what you would get if you combine both Spider-Man, aka Peter Parker, and Mark Spector, aka Moon Knight, which is something I didn't think would actually work so well together. This version of Moon Knight appears in Infinity Wars number 3 from 2018 as part of the warp world created when Gamora folded the universe in half, forcing aspects of separate characters to combine with each other. In this world, Peter Parker survived a fatal attack by a creature known as the Goblin by Night, which is Green Goblin mixed with the Werewolf by Night. But sadly, Aunt May and Uncle Ben were not so lucky. Peter was saved by a mystical spider who crawled up and bit him, turning Peter into the avatar of the spider totems, simultaneously breaking Peter's mind into 4 different personalities: the Arachnid, the Knight, CEO Peter, and Science Peter. This hero runs Parker Industries while literally moonlighting as Arachnite, beating up criminals and being extremely quippy. Number 9, 2099 Moon Knight. This Moon Knight makes her first appearance in the one-shot 2099 Manifest Destiny, and followed that by appearing in Spider-Man 2099 number 14, teaming up with the other vigilantes to hide in the Sanctum Sanctorum from the enforcers of the Anti-Powers Act. Now, one of the first things you may notice about this Moon Knight is they are actually female. Tabitha here is, interestingly enough, actually from the moon. In this future timeline, the inhuman city of Atalan is home to both the Inhumans, but also a large population of Earth humans. Tabitha is their protector. Among the things that make Tabitha so cool as Moon Knight is that she also possesses the Soul Sword, and a powerful version of it too. With the sword, she can remove demons from possessed people and can deflect and permanently disrupt powerful magical spells. With this sword, plus the advanced technology from 2099, including her super sweet armored suit, Tabitha doesn't really require the supernatural powers given to Mark Spector by Khonshu. Number 8, Ultimate Moon Knight. In Marvel's Ultimate Universe, a good chunk of heroes and the entire mutant species are a result of the Super Soldier program that made Captain America. Falling in line with that, Mark Spector starts out as a Navy SEAL who becomes part of the Super Soldier program, gaining enough strength to kick down brick walls, speed fast enough to outpace and even defeat Spider-Man, and accelerated healing. Like I said, he defeated Spider-Man, which makes Moon Knight in the Ultimate Universe one of the best martial artists around. The other thing about this Moon Knight, other than his inverted costume, is the fact that Spector's multiple personalities, of which there are 4, Mark Spector, Stephen Grant, Moon Knight, and Inner Child, which is a young redheaded little girl, are all aware of each other. They can communicate with each other, and hence they even coordinate to achieve specific goals, like somehow actually reviving Moon Knight from a point-blank head wound. Number 7, Universe X Moon Knight. In Earth X's storyline, Mark Spector was a ruthless mercenary who faced betrayal by his squad in Egypt, just like the original. Barely clinging to life, this Mark chanced upon the excavation site of the Tomb of Set, right by an artifact known as the Stone of Khonshu, sculpted from vibranium by the pharaoh Aram Set. As Mark drew his final breath, he unintentionally inhaled the vibranium dust from the statue, resulting in his resurrection through its mystical properties and forever binding Mark to the stone's will. Now, assuming the mantle of Moon Knight, Mark found himself cursed with immortality. However, he soon discovered that this curse extended beyond just him to those those who also lose their lives in his presence. When his brother took the life of Mark's beloved Marlene, Spectre sought out some pretty brutal revenge and similarly took his brother out of the picture. But it took Mark completely by surprise when both of them returned to life shortly after, deemed a medical miracle by doctors. Over time, Mark realized that they, along with himself, were not truly alive but rather reanimated reflections of their former selves manipulated by the stone's power. Number 6. Spectre. Spectre was the master of the Faces of the Moon, which was essentially a martial arts school in the Battleworld domain known as Kunlun. The Faces of the Moon participated in the war that ultimately led to the unification of Kunlun and the formation of the Tournament of the 13 Chambers, which is a tournament that would decide the new emperor of this realm. Now, while Spectre was a martial arts master and the leader of an entire martial arts faction, he still lost when he fought against Shang-Chi in the tournament to become emperor. We can cut old Mooney some slack here though, because Shang-Chi was the main character of the comic this all happened in, so it's kind of gonna happen no matter what. Number 5. Moon Wing. Moon Wing here is probably amongst the most interesting of the alternate Moon Knights we got here today. For starters, this character comes from the Amalgam universe, which is when both Marvel Comics and DC Comics played nice and created a world where their heroes could be blended together. For Moon Wing, he is a mix of both Moon Knight, obviously, and DC's Nightwing. Because apparently Moon Knight can only ever be blended with the absolute coolest heroes around. Richard Grayson was a young acrobat in a local circus, but was forced to leave when it was discovered that he suffered from a split personality with an incredibly aggressive alter ego known as Mark Spector. Bruce Wayne, who was one of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s top operatives and eventually the owner of S.H.I.E.L.D. itself, saw a ton of potential in Grayson and recruited him to S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, making the best of his aggressive alter ego, Richard then used his circus outfit to create the costumed identity of Moonwing, and he became basically like Batman, taking on Jason Todd as his successor, who would also lose his life and come back as a Deathlock to face his former mentor just like he did as Red Hood. Number 4. AD 3167. In this alternate reality, which appeared in Extraordinary X-Men number 11 from June 2016, Apocalypse showed up in the 21st century, bringing with him the Great Trials. This event saw the end of entire civilizations and races on Earth and left only the Atlanteans, the Inhumans, an AI race known as the Stark Self, the Wakandans, the Mystics, and the Maloids, and they all lived under Apocalypse's rule on Omega World. This was a huge structure composed of bubble worlds that preserved what little remained of Earth after Apocalypse's ascension. The part that will blow your mind is that Omega World itself, the entire structure, is Apocalypse. He still had a human form that essentially functioned as the Omega World's heart, keeping the whole place functional. At the same time, his horsemen functioned as Omega World's antibodies, being sent out to cleanse the structure of anything that could harm their master. One of these horsemen was a female Moon Knight who was granted telepathic immunity and one of the coolest Moon Knight costumes I've ever seen. Along with the other horsemen of Apocalypse, Moon Knight attacked Colossus and his team of young X-Men when they ended up on Omega World, but you'll have to read the story to know what happens next. Number 3. Moonshade. As the only variant who comes from the main Marvel universe, Moonshade is actually an alien doppelganger of Moon Knight proper, who was created by the evil doppelganger of Adam Warlock known as Magus, or Magus, I say Magus. Moonshade teamed up with a doppelganger of Franklin Richards and they slipped away, attempting to absorb the full life essence and powers of main Franklin Richards. Unfortunately for them, they were pursued by Moon Knight, who was able to stop them from absorbing all of Franklin's powers. However, Moonshade took what power they had absorbed, used it to wipe out the Franklin doppelganger, and began to travel to alternate universes, attempting to absorb the power of all Moon Knights from across the multiverse. This all took place in the Infinity War event and in Mark Spector Moon Knight number 42, and it shows us what could have been the most powerful version of Moon Knight ever. Luckily though, he was defeated. Number 2. Moonfang. As Moonshade, who we just talked about, was traveling from universe to universe, absorbing alternate versions of Moon Knight, one of the alternates that he happened to visit and attack was none other than Moon Fang, a version of Moon Knight from Earth 92942, who just happened to be a vampiric version of our moon-themed hero. While it doesn't appear for very long, Moon Fang is an almost perfect idea for Moon Knight, who already operates mainly at night and does indeed interact with a whole bunch of vampires, as he defends those who travel by the light of the moon. The concept really builds up Moon Knight's origins as one of the more scary and horror-themed heroes at Marvel Comics. And finally, in at number 1, it's Spectre. The Order of the Moon Knights appeared in Egyptia on Battleworld, where they served its baron and god, Khonshu. In Egyptia, all mutants were unwilling servants of Khonshu, but a group of 4 mutants, Wolverine, Colossus, Shadowcat, and Nightcrawler, defected and met with a traitorous Moon Knight known as Spectre in order to attempt to take down Khonshu and gain their freedom. The mutants were just unaware of 2 things. 1, every individual in the Order of the Moon Knights is cursed to be a werewolf, and 2, Spectre was totally planning to pull an Uno reverse card on them. Spectre and the rest of the Order transformed into werewolves and attacked the 4 mutants, taking the life of Nightcrawler. The 3 others were spared only by the arrival of Khonshu himself, who spared the remaining mutants and sent them back home. The problem is, Khonshu marked the trio as members of the Order, cursing them with lycanthropy, so when they got back home, they transformed into werewolves and took out all their other fellow mutants.
At number 10 is Black Bolt. Black Bolt, aka Blackagar Boltagon, yup, that's his actual name, had an undeniably tough start. Exposed to the Terrigen mists while still in the womb, he gained a staggering power, a voice capable of toppling buildings and even obliterating entire worlds. His arrival into the world wasn't subtle. His mere cries crumbled the structure around him when he was born. But from the moment of birth, Black Bolt was treated not as a person, but as a weapon of mass destruction. Isolation was his fate until the age of 19, and he was forbidden to utter a single word due to his uncontrollable power, spending the first 2 decades of his life in absolute silence. Now let's take a moment here to appreciate the image of a grown Black Bolt decked out in a superhero outfit, sitting in his isolation chamber. I mean, come on dude, casual attire is an option. I mean, even the Joker doesn't wear purple at the Arkham Asylum. If you're enjoying this video so far, you can support this channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. Really appreciate it. At number 9 is Rorschach. Rorschach's backstory reads like a descent into a nightmarish abyss. A childhood entrenched in squalor, with a mother who lived a life of night walking set the tone for his grim trajectory. Bullied at school, Rorschach's retaliation marked his entry into the world of crime. But it was a chance encounter with a shifting, enigmatic dress that catalyzed his transformation. Crafting his ink-blotted mask, he embraced the persona of Rorschach. In the world of vigilanteism, he crossed paths with Night Owl and the other Watchmen, but a horrifying case left an indelible scar. Investigating a girl's abduction, he stumbled upon an unspeakable brutality. Her remains had been fed to dogs. His retribution was unflinching, handcuffing the perpetrator amidst flames, and a gruesome ultimatum pushed the boundaries of his morality. As time went on, the line between Rorschach and Walter Korvax blurred. His mask became his face, obscuring his true self. In a twisted metamorphosis, Korvax perished and Rorschach emerged. This brutal origin story epitomizes the haunting complexity of Watchmen's characters, where darkness begets something darker. At number 8 is Red Hood. The only thing more tragic than Jason Todd's backstory is the fact that the decision to end his character was the result of a vote by fans via telephone poll. Born into Gotham and raised as the second ever Robin to Bruce's Batman, Todd's journey into heroism wasn't paved by rose petals. He met a tragic fate at the hands of the Joker when Batman's notorious nemesis whacked him mercilessly with a crowbar and left him strapped next to a bomb. Todd's demise marked the stark divergence from your typical heroic tragedy. Miraculously surviving his grim fate via some mystic shenanigans, probably involving the Lazarus Pit, he returned with a newfound edginess, embracing a more anti-hero persona as the Red Hood, which, by the way, is the Joker's original moniker. This gritty transformation challenges the traditional archetype of a superhero, delving into the complexities of vengeance, morality, and blurred lines. It seems that the darkest of beginnings can give rise to the extraordinary, if not unconventional, champions. At number 7 is Spider-Man. Spider-Man's origin story is a gripping tale of tragedy and transformation. Orphaned at an early age, he was raised by his Uncle Ben and Aunt May, growing up with a resilient spirit despite being bullied for his intellect and physicality. The twist, however, arrives when a radioactive spider bite grants him superpowers, turning Peter Parker into the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. But the heart-wrenching moments don't stop there. The weight of responsibility intensifies when Uncle Ben is eliminated, largely due to Peter's inaction. See, because he got ripped off after winning his wrestling gig, he didn't mind when the place got robbed. Not until the robber went on to pew-pew his uncle in the street outside. This shattering loss becomes a driving force, propelling Spider-Man to navigate his dual life of newfound gravity. The web-slinger evolves from a carefree teen to a vigilant guardian, learning that great power demands great responsibility. At number 6, Daredevil. Daredevil, the man without fear, but with a lot of misfortune. Meet Matt Murdock. Picture a young Murdock full of good intentions attempting to save a pedestrian, but fate had other plans for him. At this moment, a radioactive substance blinds him. Not exactly a radioactive spider bite, but hey, it's Marvel. And then it gets even darker. His dad, just a hard-working boxer, ends up in the crosshairs of some ruthless gangsters. Murdock Sr. takes the fall, leading young Matt down a path of vengeance. But then it gets even worse. His love interest, Karen Page, she takes a dark turn too, selling out Daredevil's secret identity while under the influence, only then to be by the sadistically accurate Bullseye. Ouch. So here's Daredevil's origin in a nutshell. Blinded, avenging his father, dealing with loss, and grappling with betrayal. No wonder the guy's got issues. His life is like a masterclass in tragic backstories. At number 5 is The Flash. You know, when it comes to superhero origin stories, we often expect a certain level of tragedy. But Barry Allen's tale took an unexpected twist. You see, back in the day, his mother's fate wasn't the driving force behind his superhero persona. No, she was just in a coma for a little while. But then Crisis on Infinite Earths happened, things got shifted around, and suddenly, Barry's life became a roller coaster of sorrow. Enter Flash Rebirth, where the writers decided, hey, let's pile on that trauma. Now, Nora, Barry's mom, didn't just fade away quietly. No, she was brutally... And guess who's to blame? Yup, his own dad. Imagine that. But the plot gets even juicier, as we can all blame the time-meddling antics of Eobard Thawne, aka Reverse Flash. This guy goes back in time, torches Barry's home, and impales Nora, all just to mess with Barry's head. Talk about holding a grudge across timelines. It's like a soap opera with capes. At number 4 is Wolverine. Wolverine's origin story is like a psychological roller coaster that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. The dude's life is a series of unfortunate events that would make Lemony Snicket's eyebrows raise in surprise. Imagine being a sickly kid only to have your mutation pop up right after your real dad eliminates your foster dad. Then in a fit of rage-fueled vengeance, you off your biological father, leading your mom to think, oh, that's it for me, and take her own exit. Our angsty protagonist bolts with his buddy Rose, hoping to catch a breather. Just your regular tale of friendship and healing, right? Wrong. Cue his half-brother's dramatic entrance and oops, Logan's blades accidentally find their way into poor old Rose. I mean, come on, talk about life kicking you when you're down. At number 3 is Silver Surfer, a character steeped in cosmic tragedy. Norrin Rad, hailing from the planet Zen-La, has an origin that's nothing short of gut-wrenching. Forced by the cosmic juggernaut Galactus, who thrives on consuming entire worlds, Rad becomes Galactus' herald. This means sourcing the cosmos for energy-rich planets to satisfy his master's insatiable hunger. At first, it doesn't seem too terrible, just avoid planets with intelligent life, right? But such planets are rare, and as guilt piles up, leading Galactus to inhabited worlds, the Silver Surfer's sanity begins to fray. Galactus, recognizing this, stifles Rad's emotions, reducing him to a mere husk. Imagine being shackled to his cosmic master's whims, his vibrant self buried under cosmic servitude. It's a tale of sacrifice, remorse, and the battle for identity woven into the fabric of the universe. At number 2, the Incredible Hulk. When we delve into the origin story of the Hulk, the surface level equation of Bruce Banner plus gamma radiation might seem straightforward, but the story goes much deeper. Sure, exposure to gamma radiation plays a pivotal role in this transformation, but why the emotional roller coaster once he's green? The answer is as complex as Bruce's psyche. Unraveling the threads leads us to Bruce's tumultuous past and the haunting figure of his father, Brian. Brian Banner's exposure to gamma radiation triggered a genetic alteration that echoed down the family tree, affecting Bruce as well. Yet it's not just the altered genes that shaped the Hulk's fury. Brian wasn't just a victim of radiation, he was a tormentor and abuser. He was a tormentor. His malevolent actions scarred Bruce's childhood. The emotional turmoil and the inability to control his anger stem from these deep-rooted traumas. The Hulk isn't just a product of scientific mishaps, it's the manifestation of the interplay between genetics and psychological wounds. A stark reminder that our origins can't be boiled down to a simple formula. And at number 1, Batman. Batman. The very mention of his name conjures up thoughts of darkness, brooding nights, and a city in need of a savior. But peel back the layers of his iconic persona and you'll uncover a profoundly tragic origin story that's etched into the annals of pop culture history and into every single one of his movies. Picture this, a young Bruce Wayne, innocent and wide-eyed, out for a faithful night with his parents. Suddenly, tragedy strikes in the form of a dark alley and the chilling sound of pew pew pew. His parents, pillars of hope, fall before his eyes, victim of this heartless act. The impact of that moment is immeasurable, and it carves a permanent scar in his soul. Now, despite being left with wealth beyond measure and a loyal butler in the name of Alfred, Bruce is burdened with unrelenting emptiness. His life goal becomes an unending quest to rid Gotham of its malevolent underbelly, driven by an unwavering desire for justice and vengeance. The Bat was born from the ashes of that night, a symbol of the darkness that took so much from him and the light he aims to restore, proving that even in the harshest crucibles of fate, heroes can emerge with unyielding strength and unwavering determination. These stories serve as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the capacity to endure unfathomable suffering, and the power to transform adversity into inspiration. So the next time you witness a superhero soaring through the skies, just remember the incredible journeys that led them there. Journeys that we can hardly believe happened.